Hey, good people. This is Kevin. That is Jake. And welcome to the Mr. Teacher, Mr. Preacher YouTube channel and podcast, where we are on a mission to deconstruct what lasts in athletics and be able to teach and preach it back to you, whatever role and whatever function you may be fulfilling. We are in our cooperation series. This is the fifth building block under John Wooden's Pyramid of Success. And we've already covered Group Genius by Keith Sawyer. And we are following that up with our second installment with Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. And the reason why we have ego is the enemy, or ego in general, and a topic of cooperation, is that it is the thing that gets in the way of cooperation. So before we move forward, we need to learn how to get rid of ego at the front door so that we can learn how to converse. We can learn how to play together. We can cooperate at scale. So that is what we're up to. That is where we are going. Excited to have you today. We have a lot of good stuff that we were able to pull out of Mr. Holiday's book, Ego is the Enemy. Jake, good to see you. Could you kick us off? Yeah, good morning as we record. Could you kick us off? Start us up and warm us up on all things getting rid of ego as our default enemy today, and anything that has to do with pride. Pride is pride before the fall.
Yeah, it's often something that has to be learned the hard way, unfortunately. Me personally, I would actually probably say I got trained in the complete and total opposite, and I've had to be my ego hasn't been brought to the surface, but a willingness to stand up for myself would probably be a way that I would put it. So I'm very aware and cognizant of kind of the opposite side of it, more so than the ego side, because just from my upbringing, perhaps from early on athletics, I was learned humility. I saw humility around me quite often, and I was, I'm thankful I had a perspective to see ego, identify it, and that it's in other people, and see the damage that it can cause. How it can damage a team, how it can create a lot of shame when failure happens, when it can create a lot of excuses and finger pointing and all the negatives that go along with ego, and the ramifications of it. Now I'm trying to find a balance, right, in my own personal life of that humility, but also, understanding my value and wanting to make sure that that's felt and understood and not just be trampled upon, which can so easily happen. So, I'm interested in this conversation. I'll probably bring up balance a couple times, but also, I think it's good to take a look at ego, because it certainly seems like in culture today, ego is almost celebrated in a lot of ways, because it can be mistaken for confidence.
Correct.
And so I think it's something to guard about and continue to have conversations about.
Exactly. So I'll define ego as Holiday puts it, and we'll get people warmed up with the structure of this book in our first draft reading. But would you bless and pray for the episode? That's how we newly kicking off. That was a few episodes ago, and I like that how we start like that. So would you be willing to kick us off, and then I will focus us on Holiday's definition of ego and our opening guiding question.
Sure thing. Father, thank you for this beautiful day, and I thank you for this time, and I thank you for the audience and each person listening right now. I pray that this conversation would be edifying to them, that they would be able to take something and apply it, that'd be able to learn and grow, not because of Jake and Kevin's knowledge, but because of the experiences and the knowledge that you have given us. I know that pride is a big thing to your heart, and guarding against it in our own hearts. So I pray that your truth, the truth, would come out, and that all who listen will be blessed. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right. Well played, sir. Ego. Let's define ego to start off with. I do have a question to start us, but we need to be on common ground. So let's start off. I want to just say what ego is instead of going on this long rant of what it isn't. So egotist in modern psychology refers to someone dangerously focused on themselves. The ego we see most commonly, according to Holiday in here, goes by a more casual definition, an unhealthy belief in our own importance, arrogance, self-centered ambition. It's the petulant child inside every person, the one that chooses getting his or her way over anything or anyone else. It's the need to be better than, more than, recognized for, far past any reasonable utility or function in this case. That's ego. In this way, ego is the enemy of what you want and of what you have. Mastering your craft, your creative insight, working well with others, building loyalty and support. Hey, we covered loyalty. Of longevity, of reaping and retaining your success. One of the early members of the Alcoholics Anonymous defined ego as a conscious separation from what? Everything and everyone, I would add. So that's what we're working from. And one of the quotes, I like how authors put quotes at the beginning, especially ones that read a little differently than I do. Jake, is this one by Richard Feynman, who I really need to read at some point. He just seems like a hoot. He said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fuel. So to kick off this episode and focus the reader, that's the initial, I want to ask you, Jake, I'm going to give you some time, where ego has tripped you up. So this book is arranged by 3 sections: aspire, success, and failure. Let me read the quote, and then I'll give you some time to think. At any given time in life, athletics or wherever, people find themselves at one of 3 stages. We're aspiring to something, trying to make a dent in the universe. We have achieved success, even if it's small, perhaps a little, perhaps a lot, or we have failed recently or continually, which I find funny. Ego is the enemy of building, of maintaining, and of recovery. And therefore, the 3 parts of this book are organized into aspire, success, and failure. So, Jake, I want to ask you, in your experience, or maybe even in general, you can take the general route if you so choose. Where did you trip up? Did you trip up in the aspire phase when you achieved some success, whether it was individual or collective? Or maybe in the failure stage? Or you can take the alternative route to say, where do most people trip up in our context in athletics? Is it that initial, the achieving something, or failure? What do you think about that? That's interesting. Where's the trip up most our hardest obstacle to overcome with ego? Where does ego most show up?
The failure one is very interesting to me. But where most people trip up, okay. I think most people see it in others in aspiring, which I think is very interesting. I think that's where the line gets most blurry of, is it ego or is it a self-belief, self-confidence? Okay, this is why I say it gets blurry. Success, where I think it is truly revealed of whether it is self-confidence or ego. And I think if someone's coming out egotistical, and I think failure is almost the undeniable decision maker in whether it's ego or self-confidence kind of a deal.
The baptism by fire, like the ultimate crucible.
Right. Like if you're standing up there still making excuses and blaming everybody else in the failure, I think that's almost like that's the nail in the coffin for me. That's we're dealing with someone very egotistical. So I think almost as you go through them, they're a greater definer of what you're witnessing. And let's put it this way, it's a better measuring stick of where you're at. Okay, do I really have self-belief, or have I verged into ego and I'm separating from everyone? Almost they further reveal that the further you go down. What has tripped me up the most? I would have to say success. Success. I don't think I aspire enough. And then when I do have success, that's often where an ego mindset will clip in, or a pride mindset will clip in. That's that's the stage. Let's put it this way. That's the stage in which I identify most whether I'm being egotistical or self-confident, humble, whatever the alternative might be.
All right, I'm going to reciprocate speedily. So I think aspire is where parents get tripped up for their children. Like they're
I
trying
love
to
this.
get them somewhere. I think athletes trip up in success. And what I mean by that is early success, where you get some semblance of like, I'm bigger, stronger, faster. I'm good at like 12 years old, but they let their ego build up and they don't continue to put in the work, let the effort beat the thing. And then I would say for coaches, just for arbitrarily like finishing all the boxes sake, failure is interesting to me because I think we get so in short-term gratification that we don't play the long game. Like you have to understand where your team is at in the trajectory. Like you understand you're going to lose for a season until you can establish that inner, those, we're going to talk about standards of performance, but like that inner, threshold of like process over product. And so I think I don't know if it's ego, but like a lack of patience. Like, oh, I'm a good enough coach. I can turn this around right away. Or I expect results, the first 4 games out of the chute. And I think that's really, really tough for me.
No, I agree. I think that's spot on. I would just add to the coach's part on the failure. It's turning around and blaming the players for losing.
Yeah.
Right. Not taking an ownership after failure, for sure, as a good revealer. Okay, go ahead.
No, when I most struggle is when I stopped playing baseball. Like you put your identity into your sport or into your accomplishments. Mine would have probably been in the aspire stage, because I wanted to get there and I just couldn't get out of my own way. There's a chapter we're not going to cover, but like getting out of your own head, like having perspective. And I was so tunnel vision, on the work and the effort that I just didn't have good balance, as you had mentioning earlier. So, and then the entitlement through failure, like because you put in so much work and time, you're entitled to your success. And that always was hard for me, is to let go of the result. Like you can put in the time, but you can't expect something on the back end. It's like, oh, because I've done X, I should go 4 for 4. So that's very hard as a young athlete. It's like, you got to still trust that process. So let's go into the first draft reading. Now, this is just a basic comprehension. We're going to go a little quicker through this today, just because we have some really good stuff on the back end. So the book we're covering is Ego is the Enemy. This is by Ryan Holiday. And Ryan Holiday has built quite the career around Stoicism. So he was a student of Robert Greene. He learned his process, and he has since written a number of books, primarily on Stoicism and a little bit on marketing, such as The Obstacle is the Way, very popular during the Super Bowl run, one of the Super Bowl runs of the New England Patriots. Great book. Courage is Calling, Stillness is the Key, The Perennial Seller, The Daily Stoic. He also now owns his own bookstore. I think it's in Bastrop, is how you say that, Texas, called The Painted Porch. Ryan Holiday is very easy to find, very well known. His books all have a similar flavor. He is a prolific reader, has a great newsletter on his reading lists, takes great note cards, and so on and so forth. So that's who we're getting this from. So he's a well-trodden path, knows what he's up to, writes great books. Highly recommend checking him out and his resources if that interests you. But I want to start off in the beginning and just cover a couple things that were covered to get us set up for our conversation today. So this book is about ego across those 3 sections we talked about before. So I want to read a couple things. While the history books are filled with tales of obsessive visionary geniuses who remade the world in their image with sheer, almost irrational force, I found, Ryan, that if you go looking, you'll find that history is also made by individuals who fought their egos at every turn, who eschewed the spotlight, and who put their higher goals above their desire for recognition. Engaging in retelling these stories has been my method of learning and absorbing them. He says, continuing on, that he's tried to arrange these pages in this book that we're going to talk about so that you might end in the same place I did when I finished writing it. That is, you will think less of yourself. Now, this is key for cooperation because it's not about you. We got to work together towards something bigger and grander than just whatever your selfish desires are for your career or for yourself. Continuing on, in the beginning of the book, again, we're looking at how do we be humble in our aspirations. Again, we're going way against the mainstream at this point. Humble in our aspirations, gracious in our success, and resilient in our failures. I think anybody who had that resume, whether you're an athlete, coach, parent, if you could do those things, you would be very well off. Continuing on about ego, as your ego is not some power you're forced to satiate at every turn. It can be managed. It can be directed. Now, way later in the book, towards the end, it says this is not easy. Like facing your ego it was a really hard book to read because you were constantly staring in the mirror and be like, I've done that. And that's human. And what I think what Jake got at without knowing it was it is a balance, right? You need to have, everybody wants to do something successful. Everybody wants to achieve something, but you don't have to do that in spite of yourself and in spite of others. Okay. So that is what we're really looking at in this book. And we are going to go section by section to see how we can be grounded, circumspect, unflinchingly real, suppress ego, channel ego, subsume ego, to be great, yet humble. So our question is as we're looking at cooperation and John Wooden's pyramid of success, be successful, how do we do that? How do we get down to the nitty-gritty? And that's what we're up to. Any thoughts, Jake, or should we just jump straight into the 7 topics?
I think we should jump straight into the 7 topics. There's so much on this topic and so many veins that you take it. So I'll just stick with the book. Get caught on a tangent.
All right, that's all right. So page 13. So we're going to start off in the aspire section. Okay, so we are looking at how do we achieve something. We're setting out to do something. We have a goal, a calling, a new beginning. Every journey begins here. Okay, so there's 2 things we're going to talk about: turning down the promotions, and then also being a student. So let's start off with this turning down the promotions. And this deals with Sherman and Marshall. And these are 2 generals, if you did not know. So one was during the Civil War, William Tecumseh Sherman, and then Marshall, which is the famous Marshall Plan. Okay? So turning down the promotion. Here's Sherman. On several occasions, Sherman freely strategized and planned with the president at the time during the Civil War. But at the end of his trip, he made one strange request. He'd accept a new promotion only with the assurance that he'd not have to assume superior command. This was a strange request. At this point in time, imagine an athlete saying this, or a coach. Sherman felt more comfortable as a number 2. He felt he had an honest appreciation for his own abilities, that this role best suited him. Imagine that, an ambitious person turning down a chance to advance in responsibilities because he actually wanted to be ready for them. Is that really so crazy? But unlike so many others who possess great ambition, he earned his opinion. By the end of the war, Sherman was one of the most famous men in America. So now we know the ending of the Civil War. And yet he sought no public office, no taste for politics, and wished simply to do his job and then eventually retire. Among the men who rise to fame and leadership, 2 types are recognizable: those who are born with a belief in themselves and those in whom it is a slow growth dependent on actual achievement. To the men of the last type, their success is a constant surprise and its fruits the more delicious, yet to be tested cautiously with a haunting sense of doubt whether it is not all a dream. Okay? So one must ask yourself, if your belief in yourself is not dependent on an actual achievement, then what is it dependent on? The answer too often when we are just setting out is nothing. Okay? So Sherman, in this case, which is unbelievable, had everything he ever wanted. And he's contrasted with Ulysses S. Grant, who did take the presidency, couldn't cut out for it. Like, he couldn't do the politics. Like, he was just such a loyal man and had one of the worst administrations after that, just because he just couldn't get out of his own way. Like, it was never enough. So I want to ask you about turning down the promotion, Jake. And Marshall did this too in World War II. He could have commanded D-Day. And he ended up telling the president, hey, this isn't about me. Like, you can make your decision, Mr. President. And what ended up happening? He went with Eisenhower. And that turned out, right? I mean, so if Sherman would have been egotistical, yeah, he could have destroyed himself just like Grant. And if Marshall would have done it, maybe he would have done D-Day. Maybe it wouldn't have turned out how the history books say so. So talk to me about athletes, coaches, anybody in turning down a captaincy, turning down the desire to be the scorer, turning down whatever it may be in lieu of a reality, and that it might be best to sacrifice for the team. So what do you think?
There's a lot of nuance to that.
I know.
A lot of nuance to that. Is the general mindset of a Sherman that of a humble man, a good man? Yeah. Okay, I do. Is it egotistical for someone like Ulysses S. Grant to develop the reputation to be the man that he was, to say, yeah, I'm ready for presidency, or say, this is what I believe is best for those around me, even?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And this is why I say it's nuanced. It's so important to have a good core of people around you.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about Marshall, hey, this is your call, right? The people around him said, Eisenhower's a better bet. Eisenhower's the better one, right? That's where the humility of Marshall comes in and says, yeah, okay, sounds good. You guys decided that. With Sherman, I guess I don't know the scenario, but if you have the current president, if you have other people that are close in your circle that are saying, you may not want to be, but this is what is best for the country, or this is what is best for the people around you, I would say it's incumbent upon you, even if you don't want to, right, to step into that leadership role.
Yep.
Right. And a lot of times people's perception of that is that you have ego.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. High school basketball team, right? You have a player that is the best scoring player and takes most of the shots. Is it egotistical for that player to continue to do that? Or is that incumbent upon him based on what's around him? Right.
It depends on, like, if you're winning, right? Like if you're successful as a team, like, is that the right formula? I mean, so if you're taking all the shots, putting up 30 a game, let's say, and it's not working out, well, okay, well, do we need to distribute more, get more people involved? I mean, it really, you're right. There's nuance. The one I want to add, Jake, to this is I want to talk about Sherman, and I want to debate you on this one because this came up and I wrote a question mark next to it. So Sherman next. So a little more context on Sherman. He was a man deeply tied and connected to reality. So what is the reality? Not some delusional, like, here's my thing, and I'm not critiquing you. He was a man who came from nothing and accomplished great things without ever feeling that he was in some way entitled to the honors he received. In fact, he regularly and consistently deferred to others and was more than happy to contribute to a winning team, even if it meant less credit or fame for himself. That's cooperation. The thing I wrote a question mark next to was this. One might say the ability to evaluate one's own abilities is the most important skill of all. Okay, I wrote true or false. I mean, because we could debate like what the greatest skill is, but we're in cooperation. So talk to me about the ability to, and maybe it's being open to others evaluating your own ability, but having a reality of like your own ability right now. What do you think of that one? That one blew my mind.
It's true. And you do have to be open to others' feedback because that's how you generate that understanding of yourself. But self-awareness is such a huge thing for people that I think flies over a lot of people's heads, a lot of athletes' heads, a lot of parents' heads. It is self-awareness of maybe not themselves, but of their child, right? Because they're biased and they love them, and that's totally fine. I get it. But that's why it's huge, right? But oftentimes there are a lot of people who will downplay their strengths, right? I think a fair adage is to say someone that's good for a political leadership role is the person that doesn't want it.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a great qualifying factor in the person to do it, right? And I don't want it. I don't want that authority. I don't want that power. Yeah, that's exactly why we think you're the best for it. Because you will listen to others, because you will reach across the aisle, because you will defer. You're not going to go off and just make decisions all willy-nilly because you think it's best.
Yep.
But you're willing to listen to the people around you. So I think that in and of itself for me would be like, yeah, no, you absolutely need, I know you don't want to, that's exactly why I need you to, kind of a deal.
Yeah. But that's a way different equation. It's so different than what we typically see. It's totally
absolutely.
backwards.
Absolutely. But I think, there's, and this is why I talked about balance and early on of like, we need people self-confident enough to still step into the roles that they may be asked that's beneficial for those around them. I think in a lot of places that involves leaders stepping into places where they're going to receive arrows and kickback and pushback and all of the stuff that comes with it. But I think it's important to have a good circle around you and to be able to listen to that circle, right? And part of that goes with self-awareness of just because you don't want it or you don't think you deserve it doesn't mean that you don't, and doesn't mean that you shouldn't pursue that specific role or leadership within a group.
Speaking of a group, let's move to that. Number 2 is be a student. So be a student. And the quote, I love this quote. It was perfect. I never heard of this, but it was cool. It said, "Let no man's ghost come back to say my training let me down." Signed in the New York Fire Department Training Academy. Thank you for laughing. So be a student. The power of being a student is not just that, and it is an extended period of instruction. It also places the ego and ambition in someone else's hands. That's so cool. There's a sort of ego ceiling. Like you have this, like it can only go so far when you're a student. One knows that he is not better than the master he apprentices under. Okay, so now there's 2 things. I want to take you to class, history and math class, but it's not the way you're thinking. So Frank Shamrock, do you remember Ken and Frank Shamrock?
No.
Like, oh, come on. They
wrestlers?
were like, yeah, but they were
Okay.
They were mixed martial artists too.
Okay.
They kind of crossed over. They were like those guys. They were nuts, by the way. He has a system he trains fighters in that he calls, this is math class, plus, minus, and equal. Each fighter to become great, he said, needs to have someone better than, that's the plus, that they can learn from, someone lesser than who they can teach, and someone who is equal that they can challenge themselves against. The purpose of the formula is simple: to get real and continuous feedback about what they know, what they don't know from every single angle. Beautiful. Okay, false ideas about yourself destroy you, Shamrock said. For me, I always stay a student. That's what martial arts are about, and you have to use that humility as a tool. You put yourself beneath someone you trust. Continuing on, we have the history class. To become great and stay great, they, or anyone, must all know what came before you. Okay, know the legacy of the game. What is going on right now and what comes next. And that requires you to be a student. You cannot get better if you're convinced you're the best. And again, I know that requires balance. So I want to throw math class and history class off you, Jake. Being the student and having this ego ceiling and humility, because, and then I'll end with the last kind of punchline that was really powerful from Holiday. What do you think of being a student?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is arguably one of the biggest issues facing society as a whole, which is interesting because there's more information available to people than ever before. And I think it leads to it, right? Because everyone's like, well, no, I have done research, I have done studies, so therefore there's nothing that I can learn from you, and I know that I'm right. Right. And what's so important about this is every human has a different experience. Every human has a different perspective. It doesn't matter if you're in the same social class, doesn't matter if you're in the same geographical area. Like, we all have different perspectives and we all come from different areas. So being open to the idea that you can learn from the worst player on the team, let's just throw that out there, right? Or you could learn from one of the worst coaches that you've ever seen. It's a great way to check your ego, but it's a great way to continue to grow yourself as an athlete, as a coach, or even as a parent, right? Talking to someone who's had maybe 3 kids go through a program, talking to the person who's just there for the first time, like what's their perception? What's the other people's perception? It will give you a great balanced perspective of what's going on. And, talking about having a circle that's close knit that you can trust, this is definitely part of that as well.
one of the things in teaching that we are often told or encouraged to tell students is, I don't know. That's just a question. I don't know that. And I think sometimes as whatever context we're in, we always want to know everything. It's not possible to know everything. I want to tell you the absurdity of this. Because I taught English, of all things, kids thought I knew how to spell every word or how to define every word in the dictionary. It was stupid. Now, I've seen a lot of words. I don't know why. That's what I mean. Like, this is what the absurdity is. So let's just take a coach for example. If you don't know how to do something or you're out of your realm, defer. Like, I don't know how to teach pitching like Kyle Body out of drive line. I can get you here, but know your limitations a little bit. You like have your own ceiling of your own ego. Don't laugh at it. It's funny. That's
no,
why
it's one of the things that's kind of occurred to me over the last like 3 months. It blows my mind how people can be so sure of themselves and what they're communicating, but you know full well that they really don't actually think that they know what they're talking about. Like, it just amazes me the level of confidence that people will have in saying absolute BS. And it's specifically teaching something. Like, I gotta be honest, I'm a pretty good BSer. I can sit in a room with anyone and cut up a conversation and poke them and figure out all sorts of different avenues. But like, to teach someone and be so confident of what you're teaching, it blows my mind. It's like,
well, and to return, so let's just say I'm going to go with the athlete perspective. Even if they're not around you, but if you're young in like maybe high school or something, or even college, go find the best person on the team. Whatever skill you want, hitting, shooting, what strength. Guys seem to always have like this, like, we know who's the best at whatever it is. Even if they're not best basketball player, like, dude, that guy's the fastest. Go learn what they do, right? Have somebody better than you in some maybe area of your game, whether you're doubling a strength or filling in a weakness. Then have somebody like where you could play one-on-one against. Like, it's going to be a good matchup. That's good. We talked about one-on-one when we were doing Group Genius. Like, we need that, a pick-up basketball thing. And I think it's very valuable in a system, and you're the system architect guy, where your high school athletes go teach the middle school kids, or maybe like the kids just starting out. You know how hard it is to teach the youngest levels, to be able to explain something simply and make it fun? That is a challenge, and it allows you to remember that you were there once too. Similar to this is if you're a coach, let's say, know the game. Like, what was the game like in the 90s and the 80s? What style of basketball was that? What style of basketball have we transitioned to? What might be coming next? And you have to, Jane McGonigal, who we've read with Super Better and Enthusiasm, we're going to read for Cooperation for Reality is Broken. She often talks, because she's a futuristic person, does future thinking. If you want to go 10 years in the future, you got to go at least that or double backwards in history. So if you think you're going to go 10 years in the future of whatever sport, you need to understand what's happened the last 25 years, the last 50 years, to be able to have a lot of context to trace that journey. Because a lot of things are cyclical, just like fashion and otherwise. So you can bring something back, but if you don't have that knowledge to be the student, you're fooling yourself. So that's the math and history of being a student under the Aspire section.
One point that I'll make to your "I don't know" as a teacher comment. There have been multiple times as a coach where a player has brought a situation or a problem to me, right? And like, look, I don't care how long you've been doing this. You haven't seen everything. There's going to be situations, there's going to be times when situation's going to hit you and like, hey, what should you do here? And you're like, yeah, I don't know. It's a great opportunity to say, I don't know. And something we've talked about in the past is, autonomy. Ask the same question back to the player. Well, I suppose I could do X, Y, and Z. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, if you do X, Y, and Z, because now you're kind of in, okay, now you can incorporate your experience that you do have and speak from that and incorporate into the situation. Next thing you know, you two have just problem solved the situation, right? The beauty of this and of athletics is player A that asks you the question. If player B comes by and asks the same question, it's going to be a different answer because it's a different human being with different skills and different talents. And so all of a sudden you've solved multiple problems by answering nothing. It's a wonderful answer to have because it creates a dialogue.
Yeah, and to put a stamp on this, I just can't help but read it. Today, this is about no excuses. Today, books are cheaper than ever. Courses are free. Access to teachers is no longer a barrier. Technology has done away with that. There is no excuse for not getting your education. And because the information we have before us is so vast, there is no excuse for ever ending that process either.
Mhm.
All right. Transition to success. So let's go into success. I'm going to flip to that page. And the idea here is we're at the mountaintop. You've achieved something. We've worked hard on the climb, and or we can see the summit in sight. Ego, though, gets in the way. We stop learning, we stop listening, and we lose our grasp on what matters. Okay, so success. They talk about, talent gets you there, but character keeps you there kind of concept. Well, we're going to go there. So that is part of success. I want to go to also page 99. Just allows me to talk while I flip to the page. And talk really here about this. So here we are having accomplished something. After we give ourselves proper credit, ego wants us to think this is what happens. This is normal. So it's okay. It says, I'm special, I'm better, and the rules don't apply to me. You're untouchable. And this is interesting as we go forward on our next section. So without the right values, success is brief. Man is pushed by drives, Viktor Frankl said, but he is pulled by values. If we wish to do more than the flash, if we wish to last, we're talking about that, then it is time to understand how to battle this new form of ego and what values and principles are required to beat it. We can't keep learning if we think we know everything. So that transitioned us, Jake, to, ironically, in the aspire section, it was be the student. Number 3, we have always stay the student. So my funny line for this is go Genghis. So Genghis Khan, right? And we have this image of this, ruthless warrior. And one of the secrets, this is new to me. Okay, I did the whole history thing. It was fun. One of my more favorite classes, but I did not know that one of the secrets to the Mongol Empire was appropriation. So here's what happened. Under Genghis Khan's direction, the Mongols were as ruthless about stealing and absorbing the best of each culture they encountered as they were about the conquest itself. Though there were essentially no technological inventions, no beautiful buildings, or even great Mongol art, with each battle and each enemy, their culture learned and absorbed something new. Genghis Khan was not born a genius. Instead, as one biographer put it, his was a persistent cycle of pragmatic learning, experimental adaptation, and constant revision driven by his uniquely disciplined and focused will. He, this is huge, was the greatest conqueror of the world ever knew. Why? Because he was more open to learning than any other conqueror had been. So he wasn't starting franchises. Like, this is not, we could take Quick Trip and Chick-fil-A. I'm good with that. But, like, for example, it was the Mongol openness to learning and new ideas that brought certain things together. So the cannon, I didn't know this. This was cool. Like the cannon. Revolutionized warfare was the combination or the resulting infusion of 3 things: Chinese gunpowder, Muslim flamethrowers, and European metalwork. So it takes a special kind of humility, Holiday says, to grasp that you know less, even as you know and grasp more and more. It's remembering Socrates' wisdom lay in the fact that he knew next to nothing. Now, ego, obviously, I'm implying, gets in the way of that. And even Frank Shamrock said, always stay the student. So talk to me about staying a student even as you get better.
Well, if we go the historical route and I go the preacher route, I'm going to go the other canon. And I would bring up the children of Israel as such a good example of this. And so children of Israel, right, slaves in Egypt, and then by the grace of a God, right, someone outside of them, all these miracles happen. They're set free. Okay. Almost immediately, they start to rely on themselves and thinking that it's kind of the entire history cyclical nature of it, right? They get given all this grace, a great victory happens, and then all of a sudden they start doing things their way again, and start buying into like we're the ones who did all these great miracles, or at the very least of we're worthy of all of these miracles, so they'll just continue to happen again no matter what. I mean, it becomes such an entitled mindset, and this is why, like I mentioned, my open prayer, pride is such a big thing to God's heart, because it's like He'll do things for us, and then somehow we get it in our heads that, well, we are the ones doing it, or we're good enough for it to be done to us, or worthy enough that it's been done to us. So then pride starts to creep in and run away. And I would say the same thing for athletes, right? It's a big thing. Like, oh, I got here by myself. No, you probably had a parent drive you to practice all the time, and drove you to the game, right? You might say, nah, I'd walk to the game. Yeah, because your parent was probably walking jobs to afford you to be onto the, be able to pay your way onto the team. There's a lot of people that had to sacrifice. The coach that's there to teach you, right, so that you can play. The referee that's there, maybe as a volunteer, maybe getting paid, but certainly not getting paid enough to probably take the verbal abuse that they're suffering from. So there's a lot of people that have to sacrifice for someone to succeed at athletics. Two of them are parents, coaches, referees, the facilities manager who's opening up the facilities. I mean, that makes me think of your dad straight away. A man who was always willing to get up at whatever time in the morning, whatever time at night, make sure that the place was spotless, make sure it was just a wonderful place for kids to be able to play. He didn't get anything out of that. Like, he could have just unlocked the door, but he didn't. He was unlocking the door. He was working the concession stand. All of these things to make it a better atmosphere and place for kids to grow. So it's one of those things where we really need to check ourselves to make sure that we didn't get here on our own, no matter what our life situation. It's just not possible.
No, and what got you there may not keep you there. What I'm most interested is reading this, and this is probably for team spirits when we get later into the pyramid, was I was reflecting on the fact in baseball, MLB, we haven't had a repeat champion for a long time. No, I'm vastly oversimplifying this at this point. I got to thinking about dynasties or sustained success. So the reason why I'm saying this is we're going to get to the Culture Code by Daniel Coyle when we get to Team Spirit. And so I want to know who's sustained success and not done it at the cost of imploding their relationships. So I think, let me contrast, right? So, and this is not it is a critique, but the Lakers versus the Spurs. You see the Spurs culture, they did win. You see the Lakers, they did win. And you can see that, right? I mean, they weren't just, flash in the pan. So I'm very curious about that. When we say stay the student, and it might be stay the course, right? I mean, what was Duncan called? Mr. Fundamental. It might be just sticking to the fundamentals, but that takes humility, right? It could be adding a new element to your game. I'm fascinated by not only individuals, but groups that can do this and can do it well. And so I'm excited to dig into that eventually. For today's purposes, is that in cooperation, staying the student, staying the course matters. Keeps your ego in check when you get there, because you can just pick any champion in the last 5 to 10 years in any sport. Just watch. What were they like before? What were they like after? That'd be a good TikTok or whatever trend. Like before or after, expectations, reality. People do change, and they have their own stuff they bring in with, right? You get the money, you get the fame. And that transitions us to the next one. And you'll like this, because I think you're more of a savant in the football world than I am. I'll admit that I have gaps in my pre-90s football knowledge. So
Mr. Savant, spell savant.
SAVANT. Got it. Focus on standards, not stories. And this comes up with Bill Walsh, who was the football coach and general manager for the 49ers when they were the worst team in football. And in 3 years, he took them and won the Super Bowl. Yet, ego. He refused to indulge in the fantasies and the stories people told him. When people asked Walsh whether he had a timetable for winning the Super Bowl, you know what his answer was? The answer was always no, because when you take over a team that bad, such ambitions would have been utterly delusional. So Walsh, in order to get here, he had what he called, the focus wasn't on winning. It was on what he implemented was the standards of performance. That is what should be done, when, how. At the most basic level and throughout the organization, Walsh had only one timetable, and it was all about instilling these standards. So let me tell you some of them. They were trivial details. I'm going to read fast. Players could not sit down on the practice field. Coaches had to wear a tie and tuck their shirts in. Everyone had to give maximum effort and commitment. Sportsmanship was essential. The locker room must be neat and clean. There would be no smoking, no fighting, no profanity. Quarterbacks were told where and how to hold the ball. Linemen were drilled on 30 separate critical drills. Passing routes were monitored and graded down to the inch. Practices were scheduled to the minute. It would be a mistake to think this was about control. The standard performance was about instilling excellence and getting the players to take care of the details, and the score would take care of itself. It was not because of his grand vision that they won. And in fact, in his second season, a coach complained to the owner that Walsh was too caught up in the minutia and he had no goals to win. Walsh fired that coach for tattling. The deceptively small things were the ones that were critical for their transformation and victory. And that's just too boring for newspaper headlines. But did you know that they actually had a record before Walsh of 2-14? Their record his first year, 2-14. His players, it took time for this to settle in, right? And we're going to cover that a little bit later when the effort must be enough. But in the 2 seasons after their first 2 Super Bowl, the team failed miserably because they let the story go to their heads. They went 10-22. This is what happens when you prematurely credit yourself with powers you do not yet have control of. They slackened the effort and the standards that initially fueled them. Only when they returned back to them did the standards of performance did they win again. And they won 3 more Super Bowls, 9 conference or division championships. Only when they stopped with the stories and focus on the task at hand did they begin to win like they had before. In this section, I want to talk about standards of performance, the standards over the stories, the execution over narration. Because I'm imagining, let's just play pretend, you've won. Okay? And there's all the stuff that comes with that. Going to Disney, sweet. You won a state championship, great. Standards of performance. And I know I shared with you recently Steve Kerr's, blocks, his values, and this is so hard to do. To go back to this is what we stand for. This is what we do. Because the lure of, I guess, flattery is intoxicating. And one of the chapters in here is keep your sobriety or be sober. How do you navigate this? I mean, Walsh obviously had a great plan, and yet his players still took it and ran with it, and they had 2 abysmal seasons. He's lucky he didn't get fired, to be honest. So that 10 and let's see, it says in the 2 seasons after their first Super Bowl, they lost 12 of 22. So 12 and so it's been 10. Yeah, so they lost quite a bit. 12 out of those 22. So this is a cool story about getting there and not staying there and then getting there again. So kind of a thoughts on Walsh, standards of performance, success.
I'll quickly touch back because it reminds me of the children of Israel as well. They were given a standard, and they fell for the storyline of what they went through. Mm-hmm. So, well, look at us. We had all these wonderful miracles. We hold this great standard. We're this chosen people. Haha. And it took their focus off the standards. And what you'll see is through the story, they come back to those standards. And that's what brings them back closer to their God, only to do the same pattern again. But the other thing that it makes me think of too, in more of a worldly sense, is always going to ask the question, what's your 5-year plan? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I hate this question. I'll never ask this question of anybody because For me, my answer is always the same. I don't know. All I know is what I can control today and who I want to be today. And I have full faith and belief that if I stay true to who I want to be today, I do it tomorrow and the next day and the next day, it's going to take me into a good place. It may be a place that I can't imagine. Sure, maybe I can imagine it. That would be wonderful too, but I know it's going to be a good place, and it's going to be a place that I'm not going to look at myself and hate myself, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be the same person after I get through that. And I fully believe that those values that I hold and that I act out in every day is far more valuable than wanting a certain position or make a certain team. Doesn't mean I don't have the goal of doing those things, but at the end of the day, I can't control that. That's on other people. So I think this is such a great lesson in tryout preparation and mentality, especially from year to year. Be the player that you want to be. It's not going to be good enough for everyone. There is going to be a coach that's going to look at you and be like, nah, no, don't want that one on the team. Okay. But if you stay focused on what you want to improve on, the player that you want to be, you're ultimately going to be happy at the end of that sequence than if you made a team, but you had to morph into a different type of player that you may not want to be.
Yep. In Leaders Eat Last, when we were studying Simon Sinek at the end of our loyalty section, they talked a lot about leaders building this circle of safety around their players, right? I see this around playoff time where guys go dark, where they shut out media, or by default, and they really zero in on achieving something. Hi, buddy. And I don't see that when they win at all, where you take the newspaper clippings and you set them on fire, right? You burn them. And that's a problem, right? I think you want them to enjoy the moment. I hear that a lot. I wish there would be times where that is cut off. And I know they say that when the ring ceremony goes off, like that's then, this is now. I mean, there needs to be a moment where you do soak it in and enjoy. That's a part of, the achieving something. I don't want to be a complete wet blanket. At the same time, that should have its place. You do need to move on. And not the earlier, the better. I'm not saying you have to train the next day after the championship, because that would be miserable. Yet I do think that is up to the leader to set appropriate boundaries and to block out the noise, because some players are more susceptible to it than others. Even the coach might be more susceptible to it than others. And it's almost the Gabriel Iglesias, one of my favorite. He's the comedian, Fluffy. He's like, but baby, they were chanting my name. She's like, great, take out the trash. We need we need people to reground us and go from there. And it's kind of like Napoleon. Napoleon was mentioned in this book, and he went to great lengths to achieve such great things. And yet, after his death, even just a few years later, Europe returned to exactly the way it was before. So just keep that in mind that, I remember some post about a PhD person like, hey, I got my PhD and it was in this and this and this, and nobody cares. It's really funny. It's like, people and championships are great. People forget. And, you just look back the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I mean, to your city, it means a lot, and it can. People still forget. So, moving to number 5. I just want to use a fancy word, which is eviscerating the disease of me. We're in success, and it says, beware the disease of me. But Pat Riley talked about great teams tend to follow a trajectory. When they start, before they have won, a team is innocent. If the conditions are right, they come together, they watch out for each other, and work toward their collective goal. That's cooperation. Yay. This stage he calls the innocent climb. Now watch what happens. After a team starts to win and media attention begins, the simple bonds that join the individuals together begin to fray. Players calculate their own importance. Chests swell, frustrations emerge, egos appear. The innocent climb, Pat Riley says, is almost always followed by the disease of me. It can strike any winning team in any year and at any moment, and does so with alarming regularity. It's Shaq and Kobe not being able to play together. It's Jordan punching Steve Kerr, Jed Buchler, and Will Perdue, his own team members. For us, it's beginning to think we're better and that we're special, which is an issue. Continuing onward and upward. I got to go towards the end here. Oops. To page 147 in my book, of course. Is that don't be deceived by recognition you have gotten or the amount of money in your bank account. Big, 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 big deal. And back on 124, we have I wanted to call them the three stooges of cooperation annihilation, just because it sounded cool. But that's just me being clever and fancy. Were three things. And you can touch on these or any of the concepts under the disease of me. But a smart person, man or woman, in this case, athlete or coach, must regularly remind themselves of the limits of their power and reach. Three things that were mentioned in this section were entitlement. It assumes this is mine and I've earned it. Number two is control. It must be done. All must be done my way. And paranoia, which thinks I can't trust anyone. I'm in this totally by myself and for myself. So entitlement, control, paranoia, the disease of me, the three stooges of cooperation and annihilation. When it comes to success and those concepts, what stands out to you?
Entitlement has to be the most common to me. That seems like the easiest because on some level, I think we have to acknowledge that it's true that you've worked hard, you've gotten to the top. How do you you have earned that? You absolutely have. So when you talk about turning the page, what does that look like? What's the process of that to kind of go from, yeah, you've earned it, you're entitled to it last year. that doesn't apply the next year or the future. It's kind of a present / past thing that we're not entitled to anything in 5 seconds. You're entitled to keeping that memory. That's great for you. But that doesn't do anything for you in the future ever. So I think that's the one that sticks out to me.
Well, just know this. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say mention the other two again because I feel like I had thoughts, but now I need a trigger word here.
No, you're good. I go back to it. 124. The other two stooges are control, meaning it's got to be done my way. So you take that all in when this is like the antithesis to like a Sherman or a Marshall, and then paranoia, which is like you got to kind of like entitlement, but can't trust anyone. I'm in this totally by myself, for myself. It says I'm surrounded by fools, focused on my work, my obligation. Myself is not enough.
Yeah, so those other two I'd almost say are symptoms of entitlement in a lot of ways, especially control. Like I'm entitled to this, so I get control of it, kind of a deal.
Yep.
Again, that brings me back to the children of Israel. If you get to the 1st century and you start reading your Gospels, that's exactly what you have. You have a certain class within that culture who felt entitled that they had control over the people, that they got to dictate right and wrong because look who we are, kind of a deal. So to me, those kind of are symptoms of an entitlement mindset.
Well, and each of these puffs up ego, right? I mean, in the beginning, we talked about thinking less of yourself. I like to think of this, and as we're going to move into failure next, this is why we read people. This is why you study. It's as if we don't think we're ever going to face adversity. Like it blindsides you. Or are you fooling yourself across an athletic career or coaching career? You don't think you're going to come across this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who are you fooling? Like, it's the Richard Feynman rule again. Like, don't be blind. Like, expect this to happen. No, it's a part of the arc. Not the arc. That's with a C. The trajectory. When you win, you're gonna face these things, and you need the wisdom. People perish because they don't have the knowledge and the foresight. It's like you. I think it's just a zeroed in leader, and it's up to the leader to know this and to be able to guide the team going forward, or even a player to be gonna keep themselves in check and say, hey, like, yeah, I'm gonna you almost become more grateful than proud because these things don't happen very often. Right. So I see it as like these are three symptoms of like you think more of yourself or more of your abilities or more of than a less of. So be lesser in this case, which brings us to failure. And this is the third section. So we had aspire, we had success. Now we're under failure. And failure is the setbacks along the way. And in super better language, these are the bad guys. Ego not only leaves us unprepared for these circumstances, it has often contributed to their occurrence in the first place. The way through, the way to rise again, requires a reorientation and increased self-awareness, which you've mentioned several times. We don't need pity or our own or anyone else's. We need purpose, poise, and patience. So those are what I would say the contrast to those three stooges is that we have these bigger things. So I want to talk about a place called failure and elsewhere. Bill Walsh, I know, so these are things that come up. In Gilgamesh, it said, he will face a battle he knows not. He will ride a road he knows not. And trials can be sabotage, unfairness, adversity, trials, tragedy. Their failure and adversity are going to show up. They're relative and unique to each of us. You have an athletic or coaching testimony. Like a good story is not devoid of tests. Every story has a problem involved in it. There's conflict. Otherwise, it would be not that much fun, to be honest with you. And in the book, Bill Walsh, another quote from Bill Walsh said, almost always your road to victory goes through a place called failure. You need to accept that and to push through it. And another one that came up was elsewhere. So you have to know you're going to go through that. That's one. But another place you have to go through is elsewhere. Kind of like the Avengers. No, elsewhere is a place. Walsh realized when he was going 2-14 that first year, he could have gotten all upset, right? I mean, he could have just been demoralized. He realized he had to look for evidence elsewhere that it was turning around. For him, it was in how the games were being played, the good decisions and the changes that were being made inside the organization that allows you to see past and see through the nonsense, right? The evidence is elsewhere. And this is where you need those standards of performance, your inner scorecard, in order to judge yourself against versus the external scorecard. And I'm going to come back to that in our next section. I want to pause there and talk about being blindsided by failure and being able to look elsewhere. Because when you're failing, it's not very fun. And the metrics which you can default to can be deceiving. And not only do you need to remind yourself, but you need to remind others that there is going to be difficulty, and yet we are still looking at this in order to keep going forward. Failure and elsewhere, Jake. How do you respond to failure and elsewhere when it comes to ego?
I think perspective on failure is a key to understanding your role as an individual. I think it's key to keeping your ego in check. Failure is something that can't be avoided. It's going to happen.
Yep.
And it is not directly connected to your self-worth. I think there are aspects of culture where failure, and I would say a poor coach, does connect failure to a team's value or a person's value. I think there are just certain constructs within our lives that can lead us to believe that. And if you want to build up an ego that is all over the place, that is uncontrollable, is connect self-worth to failure. Mm-hmm. Because inevitably then self-worth is connected to success too, right? Yeah. That's the opposite side of it. And when that happens, when someone has a lot of success, their perception of their value increases at an uncontrollable amount. But when you have the perspective of failure as a part of life to be learned from, to grow from, that it's connected to the activity, it's not connected to the person.
Yep.
And they just have that healthy perspective of like, oh, I'm going to fail, but I'll learn from it and grow.
Yeah.
It helps keep an ego in check.
Yeah, and it's almost as a lot of the tools we're learning are safeguards, right? Like having the plus, minus, equal, having perspective. There's a great section in here about that perspective, and it's like this is what you do. It's not who you are, and we need a little bit of that detachment, you know. And Holiday talks about another section about going to like a Civil War battlefield and just realizing there are brilliant people here that have died and who are geniuses and this and that, and that amount of time, and it allows you to distance yourself. Same thing with awe and other things, is it allows you to have proper perspective. What I wanted to add to this section is, and this is where I found it, it just took me a second, is if you don't have a set of internal metrics, you'll fall for the external metrics every time. So Walsh had a set of internal metrics that allowed him to evaluate and gauge their progress, while everyone on the outside was too distracted by the supposed signs of failure or weakness. And that's where I give a lot of credit to let's just say Dan Campbell with the Detroit Lions. They were, assembling a process and players, and he started seeing it. It's not that their win-loss record last year in 22, 23, was indicative of, it was how they were losing. And you saw that they started, building this momentum the second half of the year, and that has since transitioned to this year, in 2023. And that's huge. But if he didn't have those internal metrics and everybody in the building didn't have them, it's way different. Yeah. And you could see that internal momentum come through and build up, versus being destroyed from the inside because of the external metrics. So I see that a lot. And I just want to quote this is, pity isn't necessary. Your identity isn't threatened. You can get by without constant validation. Can you? That's one of my rhetorical questions. This is what we're aspiring to. This was you're familiar with C.S. Lewis, so Mere Christianity.
Yep.
I highlighted this. It says, this is what we're aspiring to. Much more than mere success. Like, isn't that what we're supposed to do? What matters is that we can respond to what life throws at us. Mere success is merely fool's gold. Unbelievable. So,
yeah, I love it.
Number 6 is effort must be extra, or make effort the extra. And I'm using that slang term, or effort must be enough is the way it was described in the book. So I'm going to go ahead to 180, and I want to give you some hard truths about, it reminded me of Cool Runnings. And I know you and I have an affinity for Cool Runnings. Do you remember the scene where he looks at, who's the lead character in that? Help me out.
John Candy, or are you talking about?
No,
Derice.
Remember in the scene where he says, hey, if, because John Candy's character cheated, right? And then he got his medal, but he got it taken away. And there was that whole arc. But he's like, Derice, if you're not enough without it, you'll never be enough with it. And we need to have that lack of attachment to the outcomes. But I want to say this when it comes to ego, and that you have to really hold and cling fast to your effort. And this is hard to even read, is you will be unappreciated. You will be sabotaged. You will experience surprising failures. Even if you do everything right, your expectations will not be met. You will lose and you will fail. And he even quotes Wooden that success has to be the direct result of self-satisfaction. You made the effort, quotes, to do your best to become the best you are capable of becoming. And I'm going to save the MVI, so the most valuable idea, for later, but doing the work has to be enough. It really, that is all you got at the end of the day. And everything else is just extra, is the way it was put. Come back to what matters, and what matters is your effort. When fulfilling our own standards is what fills us with pride and self-respect. When the effort, not the results, good or bad, is enough. And it's not to be recognized, compensated, praised, or paid. It is, here's my standards. I do it because I'm meeting my own metrics. And I'm just going to take pride in that and leave the chips where it falls. Thoughts?
Yep, it's true. To the point, agree with the point, but also challenge it and push it a little bit further, though, is where are those standards? right? As a coach, when I try to, what are those standards? What is that effort? As a coach, I'm trying to get you to realize that the effort that you can put forward and the standards that you can have are far beyond what you actually think.
Yes.
Right? You have to still push your limits as a human. Can I give more effort? And it also comes with priority as well, right? Do I value being really good at this sport as much as I value time with my family or time with my friends, right? Because there's trade-offs that happen there.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be content with that decision. You have to be happy with that decision. You have to have priorities and values that go along with it. So 2 points on that would be, don't sell yourself short. Challenge the standard, challenge the effort or the amount of effort that you think that you can give. See if you can push yourself to a level that you didn't know you could. And the other part would be that effort also comes with trade-offs, right? The more devoted you are to something, right, the more time it takes away from things. So make sure that you are aware of the trade-off and okay with the trade-off, right? Sometimes, it might not be your very best effort, but you're sacrificing your very best effort for things that do matter. Okay, so it's not like I'm not saying that you're being lazy, right? I'm saying that, yeah, I could have devoted 2 more hours today to going in the gym and getting shots up, but you know what? I decided that I wanted to go to dinner with my family, or that may be a kind of a bigger thing for a kid, but putting in perspective that even kids have priorities too.
Yeah.
That would be my 2 points on that.
Good. Last one, and then we'll wrap up with Eminem and not Eminem, but metaphors and most valuable ideas, and then about injured list, golly, and building walls. So take the hit as a gift is the last one, and this is in the chapter called Fight Club Moments, Jake. And this one is cool. So there's a phrase here called Durus Dura Freganturn, meaning hard things are broken by hard things. So when you fail, this is what a Fight Club moment is. It's the moments in which we are thoroughly demolished, in which everything we thought we knew about the world is rendered false. Was in the moments when the break exposes something unseen before that you were forced to make eye contact with a thing called capital T truth. No longer could you hide or pretend. And I wrote down, it's a Hemingway quote. The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places. But those that will not break, it kills. And it's kind of like Rocky IV, I must break you. Let it break you. What's so tempting in these moments is denial, which is your ego refusing to believe that that what you don't like could be true. And in this is, let me go back to my notes. It's back on 178. Oh, no. Excuse me. I'm going the wrong direction. Wrong note, people. Go back to it. Is simply Vince Lombardi said that a team like men must be brought to its knees before it can rise again. So in order to win, you must lose. And so some people say, I want to get better. I want to fail fast, fail forward. But do you really? Are you sure you want a TKO of truth? Do you want the spotlight? Do you want the hard thing? Do you want to be crushed? In Fight Club, the character has to firebomb his own apartment to finally break through. Right? I mean, do you really want to lose? And the last note I made was a little bit further in another chapter, but it came back to this, is that when we lose big, let's just say losing big, losing isn't an option. You're going to lose. When we lose, we have a choice. Are we going to make this a lose-lose situation for ourselves and everyone involved, or will it be a lose and then a win? Sometimes you need to be utterly demolished in a game, in a season, in order to have your flaws exposed. At any level of an organization, you think you're good until you're not. And at any given time in the circle of life, or a circle of a season, we need that TKO of truth. I would almost suffice to say that you need to go, if you want to be the best, you got to throw yourself against the best. And you need to have that sometimes harsh reality instead of me saying that. And it's okay if you have a little win streak. I remember this summer as we were coaching softball, we had a great run. We were, beating the teams in our area, really, really getting better and playing well. Well, and then you play a team, from the cities or the suburbs that's been playing 5 times the amount of games we have, and they're clearly just better, right? Mm-hmm. But it exposed where we were lacking and what good looked like, and allowed us to be humble, or should be, and get back to the effort. Like what got us here, what would get us further. We competed well with them. We were the only team that played them hard. Yet, what would it take to beat such a team? The Jake, TKO of truth, Fight Club moments, taking the hit is a gift when it comes to failure. And I think this is a real rallying cry. I've seen some teams where a player goes down. It seems in this football season, every quarterback's going to go down, which is sad. Watson, Burrow, Rodgers, Cousins. I'm probably missing somebody at this point. That can be a rallying cry. Your team is broken, and then sometimes you cooperate and rally together, and sometimes you don't. So ego, TKOs, failure. How would you handle that?
I think it goes back into having the correct perspective on failure and understanding what it provides for everyone involved. It is not connected to worth. It is simply an opportunity for growth and for learning. And you have a choice. That's what it is. Very simple. You have a choice in failure of what you want to do with it. There's only one step between failure and learning, or failure and success, and it's learning. You fail, you learn, you succeed. It's a simple formula that we tend to overcomplicate, right? A lot of good things can come from failure. I mean, it's hard to say that. It's hard to say that an injury necessarily is failure, but it's a breakdown in the system for sure, right? If I look at the Vikings, your plans are Kirk Cousins to be your quarterback. He gets hurt. You have a break in the system. You have a failure in the system. Right. Well, that failure for Kirk Cousins, if we can loosely call it that, was a great opportunity for someone like Josh Dobbs. Right. He steps in and has, I think at this point, no matter what he does for the rest of the year, has earned himself another contract somewhere along the way, and some more money to keep playing football. So failure is simply opportunity. Getting punched in the mouth is simply an opportunity. And a decision that can be made. And when you have that perspective on it, it can be a really good thing. If it's connected to your worth, it can be a really bad thing, right? It creates a fork in the road that can go one of two ways, or the polar opposites of one another. So perspective is key.
Yeah. So what Jake and I are really saying is we hope you lose, and you lose big, to see what you're really made of. We hope you lose.
No, absolutely. And this is a big divide. I want to say this might be the biggest divide between a coach and a parent. Okay. A coach is much more comfortable watching your child fail than you are.
Oh yeah.
That creates a lot of headbutting, right? You want to scream at your kid to, fix it, change it, whatever, or you're looking to blame someone for why your kid failed, and the coach is probably just sitting there, most likely if it's a game, with his lips closed, saying, okay, hopefully we can learn. We'll take all that in practice and whatever. And so there's like a complete, total different response, which is completely normal and human nature, but y'all need to be aware of it.
All right. Well, let's wrap. So pick and preach. We got some metaphors, most valuable ideas, and then one last thing before we let people roll on with their day is metaphors. So what is ego? Ego is like. So these are the things we're trying to get rid of. But ego is that self-petulant child that wants their own way. It's the one throwing the tantrum, like, mine, and no. So that's a petulant child. Number 2, egoism is alcoholism. Okay. Stumbles about, knocking around things out, stammers, does not stammer drool. No, he becomes more and more arrogant. And some people, knowing what is underneath such an attitude, mistake his arrogance for a sense of power and self-confidence. I would love to know what kind of success drunk you are. I just love that phrase, the success drunk. Like, are you the happy one? Are you the angry one? Are you the, I don't know, whatever. That's a whole concept to explore. The other one is it's a chasm. We talked about that before. Ego is a chasm. Separates you from everyone and everything. It is also you could also, let's see, I would say cooperation. If I can get my page right. A true student, this is an antithesis, is like a sponge. They soak things up. The best things come together. The one that I had that I made up was the dessert of champions. Humble pie, the dessert of champions. We got to patent that. Maybe we should like start a pie company, Jake. Forget the taco truck or the mac and cheese truck. We need humble pie. And we'll just deliver it like Wheaties boxes, but we'll deliver humble pie. What flavor would humble pie be? It would suck, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. We'll, you know what? Let's go back to the sandwich shop. We'll serve crap sandwiches and go for it.
We could probably make a killing out of this, like to every championship team. You use your like little personal pan pizzas, personal humble pies.
There you go.
Yeah. What do you think? Anything for ego or we talked about aspire, success, failure. Any of those you like the best, or anyone you have?
Yeah, I think it's something that we didn't touch on, but ego being compared to alcoholism. It seems to me, at least in my experience with it, that it is a cover up. It is a hide. It is doing something to cover the feelings that you're having about yourself, or about a situation. I mean, this is a super big topic, and I'm speaking very generally, or trying to at least, because I know every situation is different, but trying to hide a worth problem or worth perception you have of yourself oftentimes can be connected to ego. I'm gonna go a little bit more humorous though on this one. I'm gonna say ego is like a black hole. It just consumes everything around it into nothingness. Right? It brings in a lot of all the resources around it, just sucks them in, and nothing is produced out of it. Right. And I say comedic wreck because what made me think of it was the movie Eddie with Whoopi Goldberg, and one of the late great Malik Sealy is in the movie, and his character's name is Stacy Patton, and he's got an ego problem, right? Everything goes through Stacy Patton, and he refers to himself as Stacy Patton, and he's sitting at the free throw line getting ready to take a free throw, and one of the guys on the line or around the paint looks at him and says, "Geez, Stacy, what are you, the black hole of basketball?" just consumes, and gives nothing. I think is a good comparison to ego.
Maybe when we get our act together, Jake, we can just have a product line of all the things we come up. We got humble pie, black holes, we could sell a literal black hole of basketball. Are you the black hole of basketball? Oh man, we got to personify that. I wonder what animal that would be. All right, moving on. And we'll wrap up, conclude, is most valuable idea. So tell me which one you like, Jake, one thing that stands out to you, but I have a few contenders. Contender number one, we do not. So the encouraging thing is we do not have to follow in those footsteps, the ones we've heard, okay? We know what decisions we must make to avoid the ignominious, even pathetic end, protecting our sobriety, eschewing greed and paranoia, staying humble, retaining our sense of purpose, and connecting to the larger world around us. That's contender number one. Contender number two, a little bit later, is the MVI I mentioned under the effort is enough. Here's what we need when we turn to cooperate. Do your work, do it well, then let go and let God. That's all there needs to be. Recognition and rewards, those are just extra. Two more. Contender number three. 193. At any given time in the circle of life or sports or season, we may be aspiring, succeeding, or failing, though right now we're failing. With wisdom, we understand that these positions, wherever you're at in those three, wherever you're tripping up, they're transitory, not statements about your value as a human being. They will come, they will go, so long as you stay humble. Last one, page 196, is playing for a higher cooperative standard. They, in this case, players, just hold themselves to a standard that exceeds what society might consider to be objective success. Because of that, they don't much care what other people think. They care whether they meet their own standards. And these standards are much, much higher than everyone else's. For us, the scoreboard can't be the only scoreboard. Warren Buffett has said the same thing, making a distinction between the inner scorecard and the external one. Your potential, the absolute best you're capable of, That's the metric to measure yourself against. This one's beautiful, Jake. Wait for it. Your standards are winning everybody is not enough. People can get lucky and win. People can be complete a-holes and win. Anyone can win, but not everyone is the best possible version of yourselves. So play for the higher standard. Anything on those 4 contenders or anything else that you'd like to add about ego when in terms of eradicating it for more cooperation that maybe we did not cover?
Yeah, I think a couple of those top connected, just kind of the general idea of standards, not storylines. Man, we can create storylines based on things that happen around us, but if we just stay focused on who we want to be individually, as a group, that keeps us pointed towards true north. And if you lose sight of true north, man, things can go wonky in a hurry. So my idea, which I think kind of touches or got touched on with all of those, is keep your standards, have values. That's what's transcendent. That's what will take you through the good times. It'll take you through the bad times. It'll take you through the in-between times. And stop paying attention to the storylines, because a lot of it is just assumption and in thoughts on an unknown future that you can't control. So that would be my most valuable idea.
Very good. Thank you, everybody, for learning along with us. This was Ego's Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Check out his stuff. Get the book on bookshop.org, since we didn't mention that. My bad. Get it wherever books are sold. Really great book. There was a lot of things in here that were not cooperation related. We kind of stuck to the theme. Do check it out. It's a really easy read. Very heavy read. Remember, facing your ego is not easy. Be sure to like and subscribe. Follow along with us. We are going to move on into our 3rd installment with reclaiming conversation. Conversation being the engine of cooperation. So we're going to learn all about that from Sherry Turkle and the power of talk in the digital age. Go back and check out Group Genius. This is about group flow, which is pretty much the standard of cooperation. That was our 1st installment. And let us know in the comments, like, where do you stumble? Aspire, success, failure? Maybe something that stood out to you, metaphors, most valuable ideas. Are you willing to let your team get crushed? What is your strategies for fighting ego? What safeguards do you have in place in order to keep those things checked, whatever stage you're at of the 3? With that said, appreciate you. Never stop learning, and we'll see you on the next one. Jake, anything to add?
Nope. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day that you're experiencing right now, and we'll see you next time.
See you on the next one.